to Observations. I'm Iszatt, and today we're diving into one of the biggest questions facing modern democracy. Can we trust tech at the ballot box? Now, a new report shows that more than 40% of UK adults think AI is bad for democracy, and most don't trust tech companies with their data. As AI moves from labs into legislation, the public is uneasy, and the pressure on political and business leaders is growing. With me are two people who've been tracking this shift closely: Hilarie Owen, CEO of the Institute of Future Studies of Leaders, and Angharad Planells, co-author of the report. Now, we're talking AI, trust, elections, and whether democracy can keep up. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about your research. So why don't you tell us how people view AI in the context of democracy and elections?
What was interesting was we asked them lots of questions, but the thing that stood out for me was the number of replies who said, I don't know. It was something they hadn't thought about. And I felt that itself was a concern. When it came to the politicians, they were certainly trying very hard to catch up with AI and understand it. Whereas business leaders were a little bit further down the road in understanding it. But how it's going to impact democracy, that is going to be very interesting in the current climate where trust and skepticism and so on has completely overrun. And I do think we need to be really careful at the moment of where we are and where democracy is. Because politics, government isn't just there to keep you safe. It's people expect an economy to also provide things for them and give them opportunities for themselves and their children and to be a bit more prosperous. And for the last 30, 40 years, democracy hasn't done that. And so this skepticism builds, and then very often people look outside that to blame. And we've seen a lot of that recently, right across the Western world.
You're not wrong. And I think also with trust, though, as well, as you said, do you think that maybe they don't quite understand AI and maybe the politicians are pushing something that's not quite fixed or finished?
Um, the pace of change is phenomenal. We started this research. Hilary and I first discussed the idea back in December last year, and we knew, research is never done. There's always something new to learn and new that's changed. But and I don't want to speak for Hilary on this, but for myself, I've never worked on anything or looked into anything it quite the same as AI, given how quickly it moves. So, every time we felt we were in a real good space with the research and we had, answers that were really useful and valuable, something would change and we'd have to sort of update what we were doing. So in terms of the politicians and our leaders, they are having the same struggle. So, then they're very busy. It's not just AI they have to think of. There's lots of things they have to think about, but these are the people who we look to lead us. And at the minute, if they're not understanding by their own admissions, the people that we spoke to, by their own admissions, sort of saying, I don't know if it's a threat to democracy. Well, let's wait and see. How's your knowledge? Oh, I'm learning, I'm trying. The will is there, but the time and the fact that the tech companies are pushing the glitz and the glamour and look how much money can be made and look at this great image you can make. Isn't it fun? And anything else that isn't focusing on that seems a bit doom mongering. And AI is great, but a tool is only as good as the people using it. And we've got people who will use it for their own ends, as opposed to for I'm going to sound a bit culty now, but for the greater good, for everyone. And that is what democracy is, right? Democracy is it's supposed to be for and with everybody. But AI risks becoming something that happens to us rather than with us. And I think that's something that came out of our research.
That is a problem with the fast tracking it, because as you said, while you were doing your research, things were changing around you. And we have had AI in very different forms for quite a while. Obviously, it hasn't been pushed to what it is now. And when you were looking at those changes, do you think that, we might be trying to push something that isn't quite finished, and that could then see something, a bigger problem down the line. Not trying to go back to the millennium bug style, but are we just pushing something that maybe isn't quite ready or right for us?
There is that. I remember the Millennium Bug. Planes were going to fall out of the sky, weren't they? And everything. But we can even go back further than that. Edward Jenner, when he developed the smallpox vaccine using the cowpox that he'd found worked, there were cartoons in Punch and various publications that said we're now going to turn into human cows. So this misinformation has been around a long time. The problem now is we're so globally connected and with social media and everything else that the opportunity to push more misinformation is even higher. And what concerns us when we were doing the research is we saw how divisive Brexit was on misinformation. If they now have the technology to do that hundredfold, there's a danger people will feel, what do I actually believe? And that is a concern.
Yeah.
The other thing is that governments are slow. Every single leader, the business leaders and the political leaders we interviewed, all said we need to put safeguards around it. But they recognise that doing that in government takes an awfully long time. So we've got to look at government and how government works. And I just think that that AI is an opportunity to actually transform how we do government. If you took a big wicked problem that has been around for a long time, that people are not sure how to deal with it, such as the big aging population, climate change, immigration, all these big issues, for the last 50 years, they've been what an ex-Tory minister said, they go into the too difficult box and they're not being addressed. And it's when governments are making sweeping statements and then they're not following through with action and resolve, that's when all this the skepticism starts going off.
The misinformation is a really big issue for me in particular. We've already seen Parliament clips, so live, that intended to be for transparency, for getting people involved in the democratic process so they can see. We've seen those in the last month. There has been an example of a member of Parliament having a clip taken and manipulated to make it look like they called the leader of Reform a very rude four-letter expletive in the House during a debate, and that didn't happen. And so that's being taken already, and the amount of the people willing and quick to believe it, because it was there in full color, full motion, not considered that it would be manipulated in any sense. It was seen as fact. And how do you, when there's so much distrust, even the apology that came afterwards and the fact the video was taken down and all the rest of it, how do you can't then stop people thinking, no, I think that's probably what he did say and they're covering it up, because that's where we're at now. Once people believe what they believe, it's very hard to pull them back. And yeah, the pace of government being so slow is an issue that the tech companies, I don't want to say exploit, because the technology is incredible, and the things it can do in healthcare, and carefully managed, of course, because you have to think about the hallucinations, but the things it could do for us are amazing. But we're focusing more on that stuff rather than safeguarding against it. But we know, but by the leaders we spoke to and the people we spoke to in the public, we know we should be doing this. We know we should be cautious and slowing it down, and just looking at it a bit more carefully. We made the mistake with social media of not doing this. It promised this connected utopia, but unfortunately, it's done is help with that distrust of institutions. We've taken away our communities, because the barrier to entry to communities online is so low. Anyone can join a group, and then if you find that you disagree with people in that group or you have an argument, the barrier to leave is low. So in the real world, those interactions would be difficult and emotional and complicated. You don't get that anymore. It's, I'm in because I want to be in, and I'm out when I've decided I've had enough. And
Yeah, the conversation has stopped, isn't
it's
it?
stopped. And then you don't get the critical thinking, you don't get challenged on your views. And I think that's bad for democracy, in the sense that nobody finds compromise. It is very black and white. It is very, you're either on my side or you're not, as opposed to let's come together and find what we've got in common rather than our differences.
And we're seeing that actually then trickle out into the real world, where people aren't even able to trust their eyes or
No.
trust the conversation that they're having. We could talk about certain issues, but we won't go into them. But there are real concerns that people are taking something online or seeing that manipulated image that you mentioned, and even though they might see in real life, they'll be like, "Oh, actually, did I see what I saw?"
Yeah.
And confusing.
Yeah.
And I feel that, especially with your research, you looked at older and younger people, but do you feel that there is a gap between the older generation who weren't necessarily born with the tech, and then the very younger generation who were, and then that middle group, the millennials, shall we call them, who like grew up and had to adapt very quickly? Do you find that between those two, older and younger, that they are more likely to be manipulated and see AI and see these things as real comparatively?
What we did find was I actually also had an opportunity to interview a bunch of teenagers. So, so I used that, and it was interesting. They wanted to believe that AI was a positive thing, but not any of them trusted tech companies with their data. And the other thing is also that some research at Cambridge University found that the ones who are more susceptible to the misinformation are the 18 to 30-year-olds. It's the younger generation. And so, but there are ways in which that they have developed a tool that you can use to help people be less susceptible.
Is it that if they want to be less susceptible, or is that putting those safeguards in ahead of time?
Um, I don't know. I think that it's very difficult. I mean, I have grandchildren, and I'm concerned that they will believe if they Google something or ask AI, they will believe that and not what an experienced teacher will tell them. And so there is a concern. Whether they want to believe you or not, that's something we should explore, Angharad, because
Yeah.
I think that's actually a very important
Yeah.
part of it. Yes.
And what happens there, and I think the reason that is something we could see happening is humans make mistakes. We mispronounce things, we get dates wrong, we know when we're talking about things that have happened, or the knowledge that we're trying to share and the stories we tell. AI has been trained to not say I don't know, because if, from a consumer point of view, if you're asking a question, you expect an answer. And so rather than say I don't know, it will join up as much data as it can from the information it's trained on. It's not a sentient being. We're not talking about them making up answers, but they're connecting dots between things that maybe aren't quite correct. And also, you've got to think about where it's pulling the information from. Some of the data, if it's pulled from, say, Google search, all the stuff on the internet, some of that's not accurate. But in Google we know to filter it out, because we're like, hang on a minute, that's not a correct source, that's that, I'm not thinking that website's correct. So and I worry that children won't be able to do that as they get older. But in AI, it's there in this lovely compact little, hey, I've told you the answer, here it is. And why, we're teaching children to trust tech, to it's there to keep us safe, it's there to give us knowledge. I've got a 6-year-old, and I'm we're constantly what, she asks me a question and we try and figure it out together, but then I say, oh, let's have a look. And then how can you tell them later on, actually, no, don't trust it, the thing we've told you to trust, don't trust it, and think critically. And in our schools, and we're getting a little bit away from democracy, but it kind of feeds into the political literacy of the next generations. In our schools, we don't teach to think as much. We teach to pass tests, and that's been the case for a long time. And that's not a downside. But the teachers at my child's school are amazing, and she's learning incredibly. But that layer of critical thinking, of questioning, of continuing to be curious is important, because when you are looking at participating in the political, our political democracy, you need to be able to take all this information on board and make a decision that is informed and that you're comfortable with, rather than the popularity contest with the headlines and the sound bites and the Brexit portmanteaus that everyone puts together that sound really flashy, and if it rhymes it clearly makes sense. Do you know what I mean? That's a
Yeah, there's like that
concern.
echo chamber, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of like putting yourself above it to listen to what others have said. But then that's the concern, isn't it, with AI, with these chatbots? Because as you rightly say, it doesn't say I don't know. If you do question it, it does change its mind because of what you also put in, which is another concern, because you are then making your own bubble, and you can change it to your whim, and it can only take information from so far, and that again is a concern for our schools and for our young people and democracy. And when it comes to ethical issues, you talked about schools there. That is an ethical issue, not having the theory of mind of a child to learn common sense and to learn critical feelings and thinking. Where do you see this ethical moral boundary for AI?
There's a lot of work being done on this actually, and they're saying now, certainly with leaders, with boards of directors and political leaders, you need to have an ethicist in the room with you on your board, somebody who's an expert in ethics to be able to guide you on some of this. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, because I do think, because it's perceived as a race and we have to get there and win, we're not stopping to think about the ethical issues. But there is a lot of material out there on that. And we're getting people now who are philosophers who are experts in AI. So philosophy and AI and technology is coming together. And there are some academics out there who are absolutely brilliant at this.
The safety side is getting it when we think about, will it explode the world? But from an ethics perception, it's the slower, what might be, it's not getting the same investment in it to be
Yeah,
considered, I would say.
Edinburgh University is doing quite a bit on this. But the other thing is too, if we're going, as we're talking about democracy, is for me, there's also another opportunity, and that's to move towards a more deliberative form of democracy, because Professor James Fishkin at Stanford, Jim has done a lot of work with different countries looking at deliberative democracy. And this is where you get people together with different views and they discuss it. And it's surprising how just talking about things, they start to see things from different perspectives, and then are able to maybe sometimes even change how they vote. And that seeing things from different perspectives, for me, is something we really need to push forward now in the political sphere and with democracy, because we need to be able to hold different perspectives at the same time, to be able to see things from all ways, to be able to move forward in the right way. If democracy and our economics have merged, and we're now in a form of democratic capitalism, and they're so intertwined. And I think that part of that is also dividing people. And therefore, if we can bring people together more and use a form of deliberative democracy to explore different issues, such as AI and such as other political issues that are so difficult to resolve, and get different perspectives on them, I think we've got a much better chance of being able to move forward with these. It's when it's either the Labour view or the Conservative view or the Liberal Democrats view or the Republican view. It's this divide that I think is part of the problem. But even in Europe, where you have lots of political parties, you still get, if you like, the left and the right, the language they use, it's on the left or on the right, and our media. And I think what we need to do is to bring different perspectives together and be able to discuss things and to start seeing things from different viewpoints to be able to move forward in the right way.
We know we talked about long-term risks. We have spoken about safeguarding. We spoke about ethics, but when it comes to actual elections and democracy and potentially voting, do you see that there is any risks there with legitimacy of voting?
So it's an interesting one. If we employ, and I can't even think to how we would do this, but if we employ AI technology in the voting process, then that has its own, that will have its own safeguard, its own remit. It is in theory I'm going to air quote controlled by the process of the elections. But I don't think we want to understate the low-lying influence that AI has and will continue to have throughout society, that influences the people that participate in our democracy. Because I don't think we'll get to a place, from what we've seen so far, I don't think we'll get to a place where AI will question the legitimacy of elections. What we will see, at the ballot box to delivery, what we will see is people like we saw in America when Donald Trump said it was a stolen election. It'll be something comes out that a party used AI to write something or do something, and they'll say, oh well, that points to the fact that it's not their thinking, it's not their doing, they've stolen this election. So I think we will see more of those discussions. Again, it comes down to that language, as Hilarie mentioned. The language we choose when we speak to people is very deliberate, and it needs to be. But by being online so much in social media in the last 10 years, and now AI, you can get an answer out of a chat bot that if you asked a person it in the same way, they'd be like, excuse me, do you want to try again? So, and I certainly, there was an article the other day that Sam Altman came out, and the OpenAI founder, and he said, when you say please and thank you to ChatGPT, it costs more money and it costs the environment more energy, because of the processing that's involved. So we're sort of actively being, if you care about the environment, they're sort of saying, oh, don't say please and thank you, but that translates into the outside world. So yeah, not to come away from your question too much, but that will influence the individuals as we participate. It will influence the leaders who feel they need to have all the answers all the time, but it will be surface level if they use AI. It will not be their own critical thinking there, and I'm not saying don't use the tool to take in different views and shape your thinking, but you've got to make sure that you're doing the work as well. And then, when Hilarie and I first discussed this topic, we talked about not wanting to sleepwalk into a situation where you have someone in a position of power, whether in a business or politically, making big decisions who actually doesn't know what on earth they're doing. And they've got, the ultimate failing up because they've somehow managed to use AI to push them through. Now, those safeguards, in theory, that shouldn't happen. And the safeguards we put in place now will ensure that it doesn't. But with the pace and everything else we've talked about, it's not going to be quick enough. And ethically, or from an ethical perspective, already AI is not safe for certain members of the population, the world population. If you are, the biases that are inherent in that comes under the ethical side of things. But we're talking about AI safety primarily in the sense of what it will do to us, from a physical point of view. But if I wasn't a straight white woman, AI already might not feel very safe for me because of inherent biases that are in these chatbots, and they are being worked out, and there's a lot going into them. But that will impact our voting and our democracy, and candidates, I think, will struggle to keep a lid on that.
And you mentioned cost again there with the Sam Altman quote, and you had mentioned it earlier about the ethics and how there is no funding and the costs there. Do you think that then this fast pace that we're trying to win something that in this race, that we actually need to put money, government needs to put money into fixing this ethical dilemma, fixing you should please and thank you. How much is it really costing? To say that.
Yeah.
But do you think that there is something missing from that side of it?
I'm not sure if it's government that needs to put the money in, but tech certainly. And again, I'll use OpenAI as an example because they recently changed their terms and conditions to, and I've got to get this right now, but they changed them so that misinformation was no longer under one of their safeguarded and critical issues. It now comes under their terms and conditions, and it's user monitored. So they are removing themselves from taking responsibility to weed out misinformation on their platform, and then it's the terms and conditions of use. So if I'm using AI to create misinformation, that's now on me, the company. They're not taking that as seriously as they were when they first began. So what I would like to see is leaders in these tech companies taking more responsibility for what they are building, and not trying to say, hey, give us free reign and it'll be great, it's going to be this amazing utopia, because they want to make more money. And the
Yeah,
money is there, people are, it's the sexy thing, people are
yeah.
investing.
I mean, that came out. There was a really good debate about this and in the 2025 Davos meeting. And the chair of IBM was saying, don't put ties on it, just let us run with it. And if somebody misuses it, then blame that person, that actor, not the technology. So if we rely on them to keep things safe, we're not going to be safe. And that's the reality. And also, you mentioned Sam and OpenAI. He also said, let's get rid of all AI legislation, IP legislation, sorry. Yeah, copyright legislation, AI, IP, sorry, so many acronyms. And so it tells you what they really think. They just want free reign to explore this. And it's almost like the politicians are trying to, well, some politicians are concerned and trying to pull back. But I don't fear that. My concern is I don't see that happening in our present government. They're not. They're allowing them to run.
The key thing that came out for us was winning is different to everybody that's involved in this, but we all have a stake in what that win looks like, because it will impact everybody. It will impact our jobs, our children, our grandchildren, the planet, everything. And there are people that dismiss it as hype and it'll go away, but I think we all remember that there's always an article in the Sun that does the rounds from like decades ago, like the internet's just a passing fad and look where we are. So you want to avoid that, thinking it's just hype or thinking, oh, it doesn't impact me. It will impact everybody. But if we can't agree as and it's going to be really hard, because as a world we're going to have to agree this in a way, but if we can't agree what winning with AI looks like, what it means for us, then you will have the pockets of people who winning is a lot of money and and hoarding the wealth and hoarding the knowledge. Winning is being super emperor of the world. And I don't want to get into sort of like conspiracy theories, or I'm not, I don't want to doom monger at all,
Well,
because
manipulating the world, really, isn't it?
manipulating the world, yeah, for your own ends, and
Yes.
that will benefit a select group of people, and the rest of us will be just wherever we are, where we'll be. And so this win and this race, there is an element of race, because there are people. I think Hillary, was it Putin who said, whoever wins AI wins the world. So that's concerning for us, right? As a Western democracy, that's a concerning quote. And so when you think about the race, you're like, oh, okay, well, if this is happening, we need to keep up, and we do. But there's got to be some caution along the way, not being anti AI, but being pro caution. And
And that's a common sense aspect as well, though, isn't it?
you'd hope so. Maybe.
Yeah. But not. We don't want to sound negative or anti-AI,
No.
because we're not, and it has such huge potential. I really think it can transform governments. It can transform so much of our world. However, there's this race for the minimum, race for the few, that is part of the problem, and with no accountability, no transparency, and that is part of that's what we desperately need in a democracy.
Absolutely. Media literacy That's also, important. I think with the pros of AI, as you mentioned in your report, there are obviously going to be consistent positives. We are using technology every day, and even just texting someone or using social media. AI is already there. It is a positive in the sense that it is helping us communicate, but then also negative that it stops us communicating. It's two sides of one coin. Honestly, I could talk about this. We could talk about this all day, but we are going to have to come it to a close. It's a fascinating report, and thank you so much for sharing your insights with me. And really fascinating conversation. And let's continue, because ultimately this is our future. It's your children's, your grandchildren's futures. But thank you so much, both of you,
Thank
for
you.
joining me today.
It's been great. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
The Observations podcast has been brought to you by Democracy Volunteers, the UK's leading election observation group. Democracy Volunteers is non-partisan and does not necessarily share the opinions of participants in the podcast. It brings the podcast to you to improve knowledge of elections, both national and international.